I'm Joern, and we talked a lot about IFC and semantic models and all that stuff. And I want to change that topic a little bit and talk about the thing you might not have heard about. I'm just trying to figure out these buttons. It's one of those. No, that's this one. Okay. If you are living in a cave in the last half a year. So I'm talking about generative AI tools and that they're going to change the whole thing, what we call architecture and civil engineering for the future. And we looked into that a little bit, and particularly we tried to answer, are people actually using that already? Or is that just a hype that basically the press is talking about, and there's no practical realization of that? And this is a question I'm trying to answer a little bit in this talk. And how we did that is we actually snooped a little bit into Midjourney. Or let's be honest, we just downloaded and basically the whole content of Midjourney, all the queries, and analyzed how they were used in architecture, right? Because the nice thing is of Midjourney, it doesn't have a web-based interface. It actually is accessed through Discord. And most of the images that actually are generated there are basically on public Discord channels when you subscribe to Midjourney, right? So meaning by actually snooping into these channels, you actually can see and listen to what people are basically generating on Midjourney. And that's what we did, right? And what we're talking here about is we did that for the whole history of since when basically Midjourney started their Discord connection, right? So we're talking about 110 million queries that were used there. This is about data set of 300 gigabytes of just text data of basically prompts that were sent to Midjourney, right? And then we basically use that data set and try to look specifically for architecture, right? So this means we need to filter out these queries that actually are related to architecture. Now the question is, how can we identify that? Well, the first step is you just look into the query. Is there a mention of architecture and any kind of spelling of that, right? So is there a mention of interior design? Is there a mention of exterior design, right? So these were the first big type of queries that we took out. The second type of queries that we then tried to identify is we were using architectural terms, right? So we just took a list of architectural terms, and then we filtered out which of those are actually used together with architecture. So which actually have a strong contextual connection to that term architecture, but does not mean basically that they directly are naming architecture in their query, right? The last type of filters that we applied here is looking for famous architects, right? So because what we actually noted when we looked into these queries, many people actually are citing and using Midjourney to kind of create big queries in the style of some famous architect, right? And that's what we were looking for. And then basically we filtered out about 6 million queries of those that directly or indirectly have this architectural context. And then we start analyzing them a little bit with data science and NLP methods to figure out what is actually contained in these queries, how people actually use that, and what are they doing with that. So to answer the first question, is that a hype? And when you look into just the numbers of queries sent to Midjourney, right? So then you see a hype curve, right? So, and just in terms of platform, for me, coming from a big data company, right? So it's fantastic to see a system that actually can process 500,000 queries per day and respond with images, right? So I don't want to know basically how many servers they rented to make that possible, right? So, and that's actually what you see here with this hype curve in the beginning, right? So they're actually processing 500,000 queries per day, and then we see the downslope, the first hype is over, and then with each version there's a little bit of a mini hype, right? So, and now what you assume, okay, let's see, this is just a hype, right? So we can just sit it out, there's no implication for the future. Well, the problem is these queries down there, right? So it's because the blue and the red ones, these are actually the queries that have explicit or implicit architecture context, right? And the interesting thing is here, the hype curve actually is barely visible. There actually is not a hype curve, right? So there's a very constant usage of people using Midjourney in architecture context, about 15,000 queries per day, and this since over a year. right? So, and this is something like where you would say like, well, this doesn't look like a hype anymore. This actually already looked like a constant base, right? So meaning people using that somehow in production, probably, right? So let's have a look at what they're actually doing. Just using the buttons, that's easier. So the first thing to note is like if you have never used that system, so you're basically sending a prompt into the Discord chat, right? So and then it's basically generating an image out of that within like 30 seconds whatsoever, right? So a prompt looks like this blue thing. And the problem there is this is normally not a nice looking sentence that makes sense. It's just a collection of keywords. So that's why also, for example, like a specific like a semantic analysis things we could have done don't really work on that, right? So because it's just a random collection of keywords, whatever that people put in and want to generate, these keywords describe that abstractly, but it's not nicely like structured like a typical sentence that you could easier interpret. Right? So, and then Midjourney generates a picture. It actually generates 4 images, sends it back to the user. The user picks the one that he likes, and then he continues his process, right? So this is how it works. And then, like what we actually see quite often that people start to improving their queries, right? So because the first results is not always the best, right? So and then people start to iteratively improving their queries, adding more context to their prompt, right? In most cases, actually also adding more style and like quality terms. And this is actually then what we see, right? So these prompts grow over time, and good prompts, actually prompts that get upscaled, normally have about 60 terms in there, or like 30 terms, sorry. So this is what you see here. So we have different stages in Midjourney, right? So drafting is basically like you just send a query out and you don't really upscale. So the interesting ones actually are then basically like when people start upscaling things, when people start remastering things, because these are the prompts that actually are good, right? So that they consider they worked and basically answered their prompt, right? So, and then you actually see for those basically like final prompts, the numbers of terms in the prompt itself increase from 30 to about like 35 prompts, right? Terms, right? So, and that actually shows you that people are actually working with the system and trying to improve their prompts, right? So, and that these prompts normally don't contain just 5 words, like give me a picture of a building, right? So it's normally something more complex that they put in there. So, the next thing is that people actually then finally upscale the image that they like, right? So this is the final step that how we can then identify that this actually was a good prompt, right? So, and this is the last thing that you then normally see, and then we see like this is the final stage of the prompt, right? Now the question is, how often or how many iterations do people actually need to come to a good results, right? So is that actually something that takes the first results because it's always good, or does it actually require some iterations to get there, right? So, and this is what you see here, right? So actually quite a large number of prompts, these are the first ones, the single ones, that never get upscaled at all. Right, so meaning like actually like people, they just try something out, particularly during the hype phase, right? So they just dumped in some prompts, it generated some results, and they say like, oh, well, it didn't work, right? So and then they start completely new prompt, right? So what we did, that's a problem here actually because we don't have a prompt history or prompt IDs that we could follow in the data set that we have. We have to basically like analytically figure out which prompts are connected, and we simply do that by correlating prompts when they basically contain the same text or an extended version of the text, then they're probably the same, right? So then they're basically actually coming from more or less basically like an approved version of a previous prompt. And that's what we did here. And then we get to the point that normally to the point where people actually upscale the thing or start remastering the final baggy images, they actually need about 6 iterations, right? So this also gives you an idea of like people actually spend time with the tools, right? So they don't, it's not a single shoot system. Actually, they try out things, they improve things, and then after 6 iterations, they normally like the results. So, and then the other thing is, because it's a public system, actually what you see there as well is that other people start using prompts other people before them created, right? So we were started looking into like, is there something like a social network effect, right? So are actually like good prompts really like getting reused quite a lot? Are people learning from each other? The simple truth there is like yes and no, right? So yes, about like every 11th prompts actually get repeated by somebody else. So actually other people pick up prompts. And every 11th prompt actually is not a small number, right? So, but on the other hand, the clicks of people are normally quite small, right? So we're talking here about like in most cases about like 10, most cases like 5 people that actually start repeating prompts. The only situations where we see people using a lot of or the same prompts multiple times is because Midjourney pins them on their like best examples channels, right? So then you really see a huge repetition, but in most cases, actually, people don't really like do that often. And this is basically then like how people also learn from other prompts and then basically like create their own derivatives, right? So what you see here, this is one of the typical example prompts that we have seen. So we picked out or we downloaded basically like the image history for all the basically like best 100 prompts. And to just give you an idea of what that actually means, right? So like the first prompt, that was one of the first ones, right? So that's actually why it has a very huge count, right? But these are about like 3,000 basically like iterations of that were generated, right? So, but only by 6 users, right? So, and it's to doubt that 6 users started creating and clicking that thing 3,000 times, right? So there's probably some kind of generator scripted system behind that. And like I said, this is one of the first ones, right? So this actually is people are already using these systems with scripts in their own development environments, right? So this is what you can derive from that. The second one is the example that you saw before with the boat is basically like a typical thing as well. So, and then finally, what you see also in the paper is that we also, like people not use that for external design, also for interior design, actually quite a lot. And of course, also people refer quite often to famous architects. Here you have the list. The person like most famous one, at least in Midjourney, is Sarah Hadid. Right, so which might be related to the fact that the architectural office or basically also has an AI lab, which probably picked on that from day one, right? So and then basically like you see some other famous architects there as well, but also some names that just basically used out of context as well, right? So let's conclude. Every day, people using that, or 15,000 queries are put in the prompt system with architecture context, so it actually is in use, right? So this is not something like of just a hype. Prompts should be longer, should be about like 30 words long. So just for you, when you try out the system, keep that in mind, right? So try to iterate through this, right? So it's not basically like the first prompt is the best one. And actually people using that in quite a large context. And some of the examples here as well. What are the benefits? What we actually see quite a lot in all these images is very creative results, right? So like the first one, but in most cases, nice combination of architectural styles, right? So things that make like, let's be honest, right? So when an architect would do that and submit that to an architectural context, he probably like would win a prize with the designs coming out of that, right? So because it's always a very nice combination of styles, most cases very organic, and we're going to see that quite likely in the future as well.